Hello, once again, digital world. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you're all doing well out there, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I hope life's being kind to you, as it should be. We are bringing to you, a brand new episode starting a brand new series. As you may have noticed in the past, I've done other series sporadically, where I do pick a topic and I focus on it every now and then. We've done it with James Bond. We're doing it at the moment with Disney. I guess you could call my top 10s a series as well, because they do come to you on a fairly frequent basis, though it is time for a new one. Perhaps I should have done that today. Oh well, we'll do what I'm going to do anyway. And that is, we're going to start talking about the movies from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I'm denied about doing this because I've worried many times before that perhaps I talk about the MCU too much on this show. I've ranked most of their movies at the top of my countdowns for 2018, 2019. I've already done a top 10 MCU movies. Why do I want to keep talking about this, and why do you care hearing about it? But at the end of the day, I decided two things. One, there's nothing wrong with wanting to talk about things you like. That's why it's important. That's why I started a podcast. I wanted to talk about movies. And one of my absolute favorite movie franchises is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That is because I am overwhelmed at how successful it's been, the level of excitement and content and engagement that has resulted from a simple movie coming out in 2008. And it's something that I can talk about for a long time. So why avoid a topic that you can talk about just because you think people don't care about it? Silly. And of course, the second reason being that it's my show and I can do what I want. If I want to talk about the MCU movie sporadically over the next few months, then that's what I'm going to do. So I hope you're interested. I hope you pay attention. I feel like at this point, with episode 78, I believe this is, if you're still listening to these podcasts, you know what I'm into, you know what I like to talk about, so this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. If you're new to the podcast, I can only assume you've clicked on the link because you've seen the title of the episode and it's something you like. So at this point, everybody here should be excited or interested, or at least begrudgingly accepting of what's about to happen here. If not, I apologize, but I'm not going to change my mind. So there we are. We, of course, are going to start with the MCU, and we're going to start today's episode with the movie Iron Man that came out in 2008. Before I start on Iron Man, I do just want to say a quick overall opinion of the MCU. I've said it many times before. It is an impressive feat. The idea that a series of disconnected movies about different characters can somehow flow seamlessly in and out of each other, borrow characters from other stories, ingratiate them into their own stories, build a world essentially where all these characters can cohabitate without getting themselves into plot holes, without getting in each other's way, to culminate in team-up movies, whether they're on the big scale like the Avengers, or just teaming up in smaller movies such as Thor and Hulk in Ragnarok, or Cap and Iron Man facing off against each other in Captain America Civil War. It's been fun, for sure, watching this universe expand and seeing more and more people get interested in it. I was one of those people who caught these earlier movies in 2008 and just went, okay, cool. They're good movies. I do not believe that what you are trying to do is feasible or possible. I'll be interested to see how it goes, but I don't expect it to go further than, let's say, the first couple of movies. Once you start adding in more characters and more films and more film series, this world's going to fall apart on itself. We are now 23 films later, many TV shows later. We're even launching Phase 4 on Disney Plus with WandaVision. I will be talking about WandaVision, but not anytime soon. I thought today I might review WandaVision, but it's only 5 episodes in of a potential 9-episode series. I don't want to spoil anything. I don't want to assume anything because we're only halfway through the show. But if I go through the logic I'm thinking now of going through the MCU, we probably won't talk about WandaVision for a good long time. I will get to it eventually. But for now, I'll just say it's an interesting show and I'm enjoying it. So MCU, great stuff. I've enjoyed talking about it with other people, theorizing back in the day about where the big climactic ending was going to be, and now theorizing how the MCU can progress forward after the big climactic endgame. Can it build battles and stakes that are just as relevant, that are just as interesting, Has it shone bright, but it won't shone any higher? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But it's exciting. And for the people out there, and I'll only say this briefly and begrudgingly, I don't even want to acknowledge it, but I know there are people like they're out there, the same with the Fast and the Furious movies, who look down their nose at this sort of thing, that don't believe the movies to be good movies or proper movies, or think they're just made for money, or there's no substance to it. I get it. As with all things, there are going to be people that don't like it and people that don't hate it. But don't hate it. But I will not agree with people who talk down to other people because they like a certain thing, or assume that people who like a certain thing have smaller intelligence, have a odd personality, anything like that. This all builds from a scene I saw at the end of the movie Vice starring Christian Bale. Boy, do I hate that movie. One day I'll talk about it. But Vice has a post-credit scene where a study group is talking about the movie itself, I believe. It's a focus group to say what they liked about the film and what they didn't like. And there's a lot of stupid jokes and there's a bit of a brawl. And then one lady on the panel, who's clearly portraying herself as a bit airheaded, a bit slow, doesn't know where she is or what she's talking about, or how great a movie apparently Vice is, turns to her friend and goes, "I like the Fast and Furious movies." And it's played in such a way like, "Oh, you idiot." That stuff infuriates me. And it comes across with a lot of MCU stuff. Not a lot. I do think MCU has more of a united fan base, but there's still a lot of people that like to pick at it, that like to pick at people. So to them, I say, get a life. There are more important things to worry about than whether some people like a certain movie and you don't. All right, unpacked that. Let's focus on the actual movie we're talking about, Iron Man. Now, with these MCU studies, I'm going to be focused on 3 particular points. The first is going to be the plot. The second is going to be the characters. And the third is going to be its overall relevance to the MCU at large. I will try to keep these discussions brief, because if I was left to my own devices, I would probably talk about this stuff for hours. And there's no need to. At this point, I'm sure 99% of you have seen Iron Man, so you don't need me to go on and on about it, but I'll go on about it for just a little bit. If you don't know about Iron Man, if you are unfamiliar with Iron Man and the MCU as a whole, that's fine. I'll give you a very brief rundown. Iron Man is an origin story about Tony Stark. He is a genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist. He owns his own company that designs weapons and sells them. He's an asshole. He's a womanizer. He has a heart, but it's hidden under being a jackass, essentially. Then one day he travels overseas to sell his weapon to the army. While he is over there, he is attacked and kidnapped by this terrorist organization called the Ten Rings. During the kidnapping, he is injured terribly by shrapnel, and he is saved by a fellow scientist who is also being held captive by giving him an arc reactor, which is Stark Industry design, which is a magnet of sorts that keeps the shrapnel from getting to his heart. But he has to wear it for the rest of his life, or that shrapnel will kill him. He is always between life and death. Stark realizes that the Ten Rings have Stark Industry weapons. He starts to realize what his impact is on the world, as it is on poor people and poor places. And the scientist also teaches him the things he has done and hasn't done that's good or bad. In order to escape from his captors, he puts his ingenuity together to design this suit of armor. Why the captives don't realize he's building it is another story for another time, but eventually he uses this Iron Man suit to escape and get home. Once he goes home, he completely revolutionizes his life, his company, his attitude to life, everything. He focuses on getting rid of the weapons industry in his company, which a lot of people are surprised at, as weapons are the bread and butter of their company. He focuses more on building more sleeker, more weapons-ready suits of armor, and he starts testing them to eventually achieve his overall goal of wearing the Iron Man suit to go out and protect the people that he's put in harm's way. Simple stuff. And then, of course, he comes across villains. He has to fight them, as in most Marvel or most superhero films, which results in a big confrontation with a much bigger, more powerful Iron Man called the Ironmonger. big explosions, big fights in the sky and on the ground until Tony has to do what is necessary to save the day. Now, in terms of this plot and of the story itself, it is your standard origin MCU story that we have come to know at this point. It's been done, repeated a lot. But Iron Man is the original. Iron Man is the gold standard. When Iron Man first came out, there had been a few Marvel movies, but they were mostly the same ones, the Spider-Man movies, the X-Men movies, and the Fantastic Four movies, with a few others sprinkled there and there. The origin story had been done to death. It had been basically done the same sort of way. When Iron Man was picked up by Jon Favreau to direct, I believe it was very much, what can we do? We've got all these Marvel characters. I suppose we could focus on someone besides Spider-Man and the X-Men. We'll give this Iron Man guy a try. We'll see how it goes. The origin story is fast-paced, though it absolutely introduces to you Tony Stark is. You get an immediate idea of who he is, what his drive is, what his goal is. You immediately know who he cares about, who he doesn't care about, what his ultimate goal is, especially as the movie progresses, what he wants to do. And it's interesting. It's fun. There's a lot of comedy in it, which is what the MCU has become as well. It is a light-hearted jaunt. Marvel is defined by its comedy sprinkled in with the darker moments. Watching Tony put the suit together with several failed attempts, combined with Tony's very snarky, jovial attitude that he has. He always has a quick one-liner, a quick comeback. He insults people very cleverly. Even people he cares about, he insults them lovingly. So the character of Tony and him learning to be the Iron Man is a very interesting, very funny, very exciting origin story. Whether the others after it are just as good, hard to say. But Iron Man's one was the first, and probably, in my opinion, the best. Furthermore, learning about the Iron Man movie, in that beforehand, Marvel did not have its own studios. It wasn't its own film company, which is why we got into the situation where so many Marvel characters' rights were sold to other companies, and it took forever to get them back. Sony had a hold of Spider-Man, 20th Century Fox had the X-Men, Universal Studios had the Hulk. So Iron Man was the first. Marvel Studios, this is our movie. This is what we want to do, which allowed them for the ultimate goal of trying to make a cinematic universe. They had their characters, they were able to interact with them, which was something they couldn't do before. Sony had Spider-Man, so there was no way that Spider-Man was going to go and play with the X-Men over at 20th Century Fox. Not at all, wasn't allowed. I mentioned a bit about Tony, but the character of him is the glue that holds the movie together, and his portrayal, of course, by Robert Downey Jr. is what has cemented Tony Stark and Iron Man as the face of the MCU, and probably one of, if not the most likable character of it all. He's funny, he's snarky, he's charming, he's everything you want for a superhero about being the squeaky clean superhero that you would expect. Tony is not made of iron, essentially. He's Iron Man, but he's very insecure on the inside. You prick him and he bleeds, he makes mistakes, he's a bit of an alcoholic, he's a bit of a gambler. As I said, he was a womanizer in the beginning as well. Sometimes he hurts the people he cares about without even realizing it. He's human, basically. A very relatable person that we can relate to. Alongside him, the other characters in this movie, you've got Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, his love interest protagonist. I've never really cared much for Gwyneth Paltrow, but I do like Pepper Potts' relationship with Tony in the movies. I like their little thing back and forth there. Their assistant and boss, then partners, then couple. It's organically done. Is good to watch as well. Terrence Howard plays Rhodey, who would eventually be replaced by Don Cheadle as War Machine. It's interesting rewatching this because the Terrence Howard Rhodey is quite different from the Don Cheadle Rhodey, and I love the Don Cheadle Rhodey, so it's hard to really look at Terrence Howard's portrayal and go, yeah, this is the better one, because it's not, clearly. But a lot of what defined Rhodey, Terrence Howard brought into this movie with his friendship with Tony that rivaled on annoyance, always having his back, being there for him at all the times. So he's a good sidekick. The hints at him being War Machine as well are scattered throughout, but they don't force it into this movie. It's a nice little, we hope we can make a sequel, and if so, this is where we'd want to go with the character. Our villain, Jeff Bridges, as Obadiah Stane, the Ironmonger. I would say, watch out for spoilers, but Jeff Bridges plays Stane in such a way that you know he's the villain of the film. So apologize if I did spoil it for you, but I don't care at this point. Jeff Bridges is a great actor. I love watching him and stuff. He's got this charm about him, this smugness that really comes through with Stain. He sort of, it seems like he would be your friend if the right circumstances allowed it, but would absolutely stab you in the back if the right circumstances came up about. This movie started the trend of the bad guy is the opposite evil version of the good guy. So Ironmonger is the suit that Stain gets to fight Iron Man, which is just a much bigger, much bulkier, much apparently more powerful Iron Man suit. Once he jumps into the Ironmonger suit, we do lose a lot of the charm of Jeff Bridges. But before that, when you see him being a friendly guy, even though you know he's a completely evil tosser, is a lot of fun to have. And alongside all these other characters, you've got littered through small roles, which would eventually grow larger as the MCU went along. You've got Clark Gregg as Agent Phil Coulson from the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Logistics Division, or an acronym for that team, which you'll have to watch the movie to find out about. Paul Bettany is the voice of Jarvis, Tony's AI, his British AI, who's always helps him with his Iron Man suit and has come back for everything Tony says. Jon Favreau, the director, even cameos very briefly as Tony's bodyguard, Happy Hogan, who would of course grow into more of a substantial role in later films. And another cameo, which leads into our final point of this Iron Man discussion, which is its relation to the MCU as a whole. Now, looking at Iron Man, it's interesting because this movie was not made as this is going to be the first in our MCU saga. We know what the next 22 movies are going to be. We're going to start with Iron Man. Iron Man was made simply as a movie that might launch its own franchise with the background hope that maybe, just maybe, this might lead to something more, but not banking on it, not putting all their ducks in one basket, not doing what the rest of the cinematic universes out there are trying to do, such as the Dark Monster cinematic universe with the Mummy and everything, which takes its first movie and focuses primarily on setting up this universe, hinting at all these different characters to a point where the actual movie itself suffers. Nobody cares because you're focused too much on introducing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde so that you can lead into a Dr. Jekyll movie with the Invisible Man and the Werewolf of London, whereas the Mummy itself is an afterthought in the movie called The Mummy. The Iron Man movie is first and foremost about Iron Man. It's about his origin. It's about Tony Stark, and that's all it is. The MCU references that have come up later are things that have looked back on the movie and gone, we can link that to something that's in this movie, but it was not put in the movie to say this is what's going to happen later on. As such, it is a very self-contained movie. You could watch Iron Man and never move on to any of the other stuff. If you didn't want to, you don't have to. You've got your self-contained story. And that's what's great about this and other MCU films, is not about how it connects to it as a whole, but whether it can stand on its own. The MCU connections are a lovely treat, and it's good to hear them and see them sometimes and be able to go, oh, cool. But it cannot be the foundation of your movie, and that's not the case in Iron Man. For our cameo with our post-credit scene where Samuel L. Jackson does show up as Nick Fury to talk to Tony about the Avengers Initiative, it was just put in there for fun. As with a lot of things back then with post-credit scenes weren't made to hint at sequels and movies. They were little tags just to thank people for sitting through the credits, because no one did that. Everybody left as soon as the credits went up. There have been tons of post-credit scenes across movies well before Iron Man. Iron Man did not originate it. The MCU did not originate it. The MCU turned it into an art form, sure, but it did exist before that. So Samuel L. Jackson showing up in this was not a, yes, this is what we're going to do. We're jumping into our next film with Samuel L. Jackson head on Nick Fury taking the reins. It was, this will be fun. We'll see if we can get Samuel L. Jackson on set. It'll be a nice hint at what we could potentially be doing, but if nothing comes of it, it's still fun to have at the end of the movie. MCU, the people behind it, Kevin Feige, everybody, they did not race to put Nick Fury in the next movie. They did not put Nick Fury front and center until 6 movies later. He kept appearing sporadically, but he was not the focus. It was not the focus of building the Avengers. It was very much focusing on the characters they were introducing with the hope that they could all come together at some point later on, which is why the Nick Fury post-credit scene might be one of the best MCU post-credit scenes by far. Its simplicity, its good-natured ideals and intentions, but just fun sign-off for a movie that was surprisingly good for a character that people weren't sure would be as popular as Spider-Man or the X-Men, and turned out great for everybody on all sides. 100% success as a standalone movie, 100% success for Robert Downey Jr. and his comeback, for the character of Iron Man, for hinting at a larger world, for Samuel L. Jackson. Everything in it, just somehow all the stars aligned to make a perfect movie and a perfect start to the MCU franchise. Iron Man is one of my favorite MCU films. If you go and watch my top 10 MCU films, Iron Man is on that list. It's great stuff. It's great for what it achieved, and I love it. If you haven't seen the MCU, if you're wary of superhero films, if you're wary of Marvel films, I would recommend you just give Iron Man a try. And I do not implore you that you have to then go and watch every other movie after it. Just watch Iron Man. If you don't like it, that's fine. I'd be surprised. But if you don't like it, you don't have to watch anything else. You're not obligated to. You won't feel like you have to. But you also won't feel like you don't understand anything while you're watching Iron Man. It is simply that good of a self-contained movie, yet also a fun starting point, stepping stone into the bigger world. There we are. I'll wrap it up by saying thank you all for listening to our very first MCU discussion talking about Iron Man. Over the next few months, we will try and check back in every now and then to talk about the other moves, and we will be going chronologically, which means Avengers Endgame won't be talked about for a while, WandaVision won't be talked about for a while, Spider-Man Far From Home won't be talked about for a while. Our next entry will be The Incredible Hulk, which some look at it as the black sheep of the MCU. I actually think it's rather good for a few specific reasons, which we will touch on when we check back in again for that. But until then, thank you all for listening to me as always. It's been a treat talking with you. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've gone down memory lane with Iron Man. I hope you have validated your appreciation for the MCU, and I hope at the very least you've tolerated talking about the MCU once again. I love and appreciate you as always. I will catch you next week. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.